The woman sitting across from Oprah Winfrey clutched a worn lottery ticket in her trembling hands, as if it were both her salvation and her damnation. At 43, Rebecca Martinez still carried the understated grace of someone who had spent 15 years teaching fifth grade, but there was something haunted in her dark eyes, a weight that seemed far too heavy for someone who should have been living every American's ultimate dream. Her simple black dress and minimal jewelry spoke of someone trying to blend into the background rather than celebrate extraordinary fortune, and the way she kept glancing nervously at the studio exits suggested a person who had learned that being the center of attention could be more curse than blessing. She wore no designer clothes, no expensive jewelry, none of the obvious markers of the extraordinary wealth that had transformed her from Rebecca Martinez, the elementary school teacher, into Rebecca Martinez, the $18 million lottery winner. The ticket she held, creased from countless folds and unfolds over the past 3 years, was the physical reminder of the moment that had changed everything, that had given her every material thing she had ever dreamed of, while simultaneously taking away everything that had actually mattered. The familiar warmth of Harpo Studios buzzed around them, but Rebecca felt exposed and vulnerable under the bright lights, hyper-aware of the 300 audience members whose faces reflected the same mixture of envy and curiosity she had grown accustomed to seeing everywhere she went. Behind the cameras, producers whispered into headsets, while sound technicians adjusted levels and lighting directors fine-tuned the welcoming glow that had made this space America's sanctuary for stories of triumph and transformation. Oprah Winfrey sat in her signature chair, radiant in a deep golden silk blouse that seemed to capture and reflect the studio lights like captured sunshine. Her presence filled the space with that unique combination of authority and warmth that had made her the most trusted voice in American media for over 2 decades. Today's show was dedicated to dreams come true, a special episode highlighting people whose lives had been transformed by unexpected fortune, who had achieved the kind of success that most people could only imagine. But Rebecca Martinez carried a secret that would transform this celebration of good fortune into something far more complex and heartbreaking. She had gotten on the show by telling the producers she wanted to share her inspiring story of using lottery winnings to help her community and fulfill lifelong dreams. It wasn't entirely untrue. She had donated money to her former school and had traveled to places she had only seen in magazines. But the truth was that winning the $180 million had been the beginning of the worst 3 years of her life, and she had come to Oprah's show not to celebrate her good fortune, but to confess that sometimes getting everything you think you want can destroy everything you actually need. Rebecca had bought the winning ticket on March 15, 2021, at the corner market where she stopped every Friday after school to buy a Diet Coke, and, on impulse, a single lottery ticket with numbers that represented the birthdays of her husband Carlos and their 2 teenage children, Sophia and Miguel. It was a ritual she had maintained for years without any real expectation of winning, just a small weekly indulgence that cost $5 and provided a few minutes of harmless fantasy about what she might do with unimaginable wealth. She had been grading papers at her kitchen table when the lottery drawing came on television that night. Carlos was working late at the auto repair shop he co-owned with his brother, and the kids were upstairs doing homework. Rebecca was only half paying attention to the screen when the winning numbers were announced. It took 3 repetitions of the sequence before she realized she was holding the winning ticket, before the impossible truth penetrated her disbelief and changed everything forever. The moments immediately following her realization had been surreal, a mixture of euphoria, disbelief, and terror that she would later recognize as the last purely happy emotions she would experience in connection with her lottery win. She had called Carlos, her voice shaking as she tried to explain what had happened. She had woken Sophia and Miguel, pulling them into the kitchen to stare at the ticket and the television screen in collective amazement. For those first few hours, before lawyers and financial advisors and media attention complicated everything, the Martinez family had simply held each other and marveled at the impossibility of their good fortune. But within days, Rebecca began to understand that winning the lottery was not the fairy tale ending she had imagined. The phone calls started first relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly expressing renewed interest in family relationships. Old friends reaching out with business propositions and investment opportunities. Complete strangers who had somehow obtained her phone number with heartbreaking sob stories and desperate requests for financial help. The media attention was overwhelming. Reporters camped outside their modest three-bedroom house. Photographers followed the children to school. And every aspect of their previously private lives became subject to public scrutiny and commentary. Rebecca, who had always valued her anonymity and quiet family life, found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never wanted and didn't know how to navigate. The money itself created complications she had never anticipated. Financial advisors, lawyers, and investment managers all competed for her business, each presenting complex strategies for managing wealth that made her feel ignorant and overwhelmed. Friends and neighbors began treating her differently, some with obvious resentment, others with transparent neediness, few with the genuine warmth she had previously taken for granted. But the worst changes were happening within her own family. Carlos, who had always been the primary breadwinner, struggled with feeling diminished by his wife's sudden financial dominance. Their children, previously grounded and focused on school and friends, became entitled and demanding, asking for expensive gifts and experiences that Rebecca found herself unable to refuse. The family dynamics that had worked for 15 years of marriage began to crumble under the weight of unlimited financial possibilities and the external pressures that came with public wealth. Within 6 months, Rebecca realized that the lottery ticket she still carried in her purse had not bought her happiness. It had purchased isolation, anxiety, and the gradual destruction of everything she had actually treasured about her life. She began to understand why so many lottery winners ended up bankrupt, divorced, or worse within a few years of their wins. The money amplified every human weakness and strained every relationship, revealing character flaws in people she had trusted, and creating dependencies that felt more like imprisonment than liberation. The breaking point came 18 months after the win, when Rebecca discovered that Carlos had been having an affair with a woman 20 years younger, a relationship that had begun according to her private investigator. Around the same time, the lottery money had started making Carlos feel like a failure as a provider. When she confronted him, Carlos's explanation was devastating in its honesty. He felt like he had become irrelevant in his own family, like his role as husband and father had been diminished by money that could solve every problem without his input or effort. The divorce proceedings were ugly and public, with every detail scrutinized by media outlets that treated her personal tragedy as entertainment for people who had envied her good fortune. Carlos demanded half of the remaining lottery money, claiming that the ticket had been purchased with community property funds and that he deserved compensation for the emotional distress of being married to someone whose wealth had emasculated him. The children were forced to choose sides, and both chose their father, viewing Rebecca as the person whose greed and poor decision-making had destroyed their family. By the 3rd anniversary of her lottery win, Rebecca Martinez found herself living alone in a mansion she had never wanted, surrounded by expensive possessions that brought her no joy, estranged from her children, who now saw her only as a source of financial support, and haunted by the realization that the best day of her life, the day she won $180 million, had also been the beginning of losing everything that had actually made her life worth living. That's what had brought her to Oprah's show today. The letter she had written to the producers had been an attempt to make sense of her experience, to find meaning in a story that felt like a cautionary tale rather than a success story. She had hoped that talking about the unexpected consequences of sudden wealth might help other people avoid the mistakes she had made. But more honestly, she was desperately seeking wisdom about how to rebuild a life that had been destroyed by what everyone else considered the ultimate good fortune. The show's opening segments had featured inspiring stories of people whose dreams had come true through hard work, talent, persistence. An entrepreneur who had built a successful business from nothing. An artist whose work had finally gained recognition after years of struggle. a single mother who had put herself through medical school and now ran a clinic in her former neighborhood. Each story was uplifting, each guest embodying the kind of earned success that made for compelling television. But when Oprah introduced Rebecca, something in her expression suggested she sensed this conversation might be different. "Ladies and gentlemen," Oprah announced, "I want you to meet Rebecca Martinez." 3 years ago, Rebecca was a fifth-grade teacher living a quiet life with her family. Then she bought a lottery ticket that changed everything. She won $180 million, the largest jackpot in her state's history. Today, she's here to share her incredible journey and what she's learned about making dreams come true. Rebecca stood carefully, her movement betraying none of the anxiety that was making her heart race. As she walked to the interview area, she felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on her, and could see the mixture of envy and fascination that had become familiar expressions on the faces of people who knew about her lottery win. As they settled into their chairs, Oprah noticed the worn lottery ticket Rebecca still clutched in her hand, and the way her eyes lacked the joy and contentment that usually characterized people discussing the fulfillment of their deepest dreams. "Rebecca," Oprah began warmly, "when most people fantasize about winning the lottery, they imagine it solving all their problems and bringing them happiness beyond their wildest dreams. Tell us what it's actually been like to live that fantasy." Rebecca had rehearsed answers about the opportunities that wealth had provided, the ability to help her community, the freedom from financial stress that the lottery win had created. But sitting across from Oprah Winfrey, under the bright studio lights that somehow made everything feel more real and more exposed, the carefully constructed narrative began to feel not just inadequate but dishonest. "Oprah," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, "I think most people believe that money can buy happiness, because they've never had enough money to test that theory. I spent 40 years thinking that if I just had enough money to stop worrying about bills, to give my children everything they wanted, to travel and experience the world, I thought that would make me happy." She held up the lottery ticket, its edges frayed from years of handling. "This piece of paper gave me $180 million, and it has been the source of more misery and heartbreak than I could have imagined possible." The audience shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this response from someone living what they considered the ultimate American dream. "How is that possible?" Oprah asked gently, sensing that they were moving into deeper, more complex territory than the typical lottery winner success story. Rebecca looked down at the ticket, then back at Oprah, and everyone watching could see her making a choice between the performance people expected and the truth she had been carrying alone. "Because money doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are," Rebecca said, her voice growing stronger. "And it reveals who everyone around you really is. Money amplifies every character flaw, every weakness, every hidden resentment that was already there, but manageable when there was less at stake." She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she continued to hold the ticket. "Within a year of winning this lottery, I lost my husband to an affair with a younger woman who was rated to what my money could provide. I lost my children, who began seeing me as a bank account rather than their mother. I lost my friend, who either resented my good fortune or wanted to profit from it. I lost my sense of purpose because I no longer needed to work and didn't know what to do with unlimited free time." The studio fell into the kind of focused silence that comes when people realize they're witnessing something unexpected and profound, the deconstruction of a dream they had all shared. "Rebecca," Oprah said softly, "are you saying you wish you had never won?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she confronted a question she had been avoiding for 3 years. "Yes," she whispered. "I wish I had never bought this ticket. I wish I had never won this money. I wish I could go back to being a teacher with a modest salary, a husband who felt needed, children who loved me for who I was rather than what I could give them." The audience was completely silent now, confronted with the possibility that their deepest fantasy might actually be a nightmare in disguise. "The person I was before this lottery win was happy," Rebecca continued, her voice breaking. "She had a purpose, relationships that mattered, A life that felt meaningful even though it wasn't glamorous or wealthy. The person I am now has everything money can buy, and nothing that actually matters. Oprah leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the complex relationship between success and happiness. Rebecca, what do you think went wrong? Why did money have such a destructive impact on your life? Rebecca was quiet for a moment, considering a question she had wrestled with for years. I think it's because money removes all the constraints that force people to grow, to compromise, to work together, she said finally. When Carlos and I had limited money, we had to communicate about every major purchase, plan together for our children's futures, support each other through financial stress. That collaboration, that mutual dependence, it was actually the foundation of our relationship. She gestured with the lottery ticket. When money was unlimited, when I could solve any problem by writing a check, when the children could have anything they wanted without working for it or appreciating it, all those character-building struggles disappeared. And apparently, those struggles were what had been keeping us together, keeping us grounded, keeping us human. Oprah nodded, recognizing the profound insight about the relationship between limitation and growth. What about your children? How did unlimited money affect them? Rebecca's pain was visible as she discussed the loss that hurt most deeply. Sophia and Miguel went from being grateful, hard-working kids to entitled teenagers who expected everything to be handed to them, she said. When they wanted a car, I bought them each a BMW, instead of making them save money and earn the privilege. When they wanted designer clothes, I took them on $1,000 shopping sprees, instead of teaching them about budgeting and values. Her voice grew quieter, more introspective. I thought I was giving them advantages, opportunities I never had. But what I was actually doing was robbing them of the satisfaction that comes from working for something, the appreciation that comes from having to choose carefully because resources are limited, the character development that comes from not getting everything you want immediately. And how did that affect your relationship with them? They stopped seeing me as their mother and started seeing me as an ATM, Rebecca said bluntly. Every conversation became about what they wanted me to buy them. Every family interaction was transactional. The love and respect that had characterized our relationships was replaced by expectation and entitlement. She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. When Carlos and I divorced, they chose to live with him because they blamed me for destroying the family with my greed and poor decisions. They see the lottery money as something that corrupted me rather than something that revealed existing problems in our relationships. Oprah was visibly moved by Rebecca's honesty about the destruction of her most important relationships. Rebecca, if you could go back to that night 3 years ago, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently? Rebecca looked at the lottery ticket in her hands, considering a question that had haunted her for years. I would tear up this ticket, she said without hesitation. I would throw it away and go back to grading papers and worrying about making the mortgage payment and being grateful for small pleasures and working for everything we had. The audience gasped audibly, unable to comprehend someone rejecting such extraordinary wealth. I would choose the problems I understood over the problems I created, Rebecca continued. Financial stress, work pressure, the challenge of raising children on a limited budget. Those problems had solutions. They brought families together, forced people to be resourceful and grateful and connected. She held up the ticket again. The problems that come with unlimited money, entitlement, resentment, the loss of purpose, the destruction of authentic relationships, those problems are much harder to solve. Money can't buy back the respect of your children or the love of your spouse or the satisfaction of feeling needed and useful. That's when Rebecca did something that no one in the studio expected. She stood up, still holding the lottery ticket, and looked directly at the camera. To everyone watching who dreams of winning the lottery, who believes that money would solve all their problems and make them happy, she said, her voice clear and strong, I want you to understand something that I learned too late. Happiness doesn't come from having everything you want. It comes from wanting what you have. She paused, the ticket trembling in her hands. The night I won this lottery, I already had everything I needed to be happy. A husband who loved me, children who respected me, work that gave me purpose, friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. I was rich in all the ways that actually matter, but I was too blind to see it. Oprah stood up beside her, sensing that something unprecedented was about to happen. "Rebecca, what are you saying?" Rebecca looked at the ticket one more time, then at Oprah, then at the audience of 300 people who were witnessing something they had never expected to see. "I'm saying that this ticket destroyed my life, and I want to destroy it before it hurts anyone else." With deliberate, careful movements, Rebecca began to tear the lottery ticket in half. The audience gasped, several people calling out "no" as if they were watching someone commit an unthinkable act of self-destruction. But Rebecca continued tearing, reducing the ticket to smaller and smaller pieces until it was nothing but confetti in her hands. "This ticket represented everything I thought I wanted and nothing I actually needed," she said, letting the pieces fall to the studio floor. "For 3 years, I've been carrying it around like a reminder of the worst decision I ever made. Today, I'm choosing to let it go." Oprah was openly crying now, understanding that she had witnessed something profound, not the destruction of wealth, but the liberation from a burden that had been disguised as a blessing. "Rebecca," she said, "the money still exists. Tearing up the ticket doesn't make the lottery win disappear." "No," Rebecca agreed, "but it makes me free from the need to carry the reminder of what it cost me. The money is still there, and I'm still responsible for what I do with it, but I don't have to let it define me anymore." She looked around the studio, at the faces of people who were trying to understand why someone would reject what they considered the ultimate fortune. "I'm going to do something I should have done 3 years ago," Rebecca announced. "I'm going to give away most of this money to organizations that help families stay together, that provide counseling for people dealing with sudden wealth, that support teachers and schools in low-income communities." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. "And I'm going to go back to teaching, not because I need the money, but because I need the purpose. I need to feel useful, needed, connected to work that matters beyond my own financial benefit." The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't the polite television applause they'd been giving all afternoon. This was something deeper, recognition of someone choosing meaning over money, purpose over possession, connection over comfort. As the show concluded, Rebecca Martinez stood surrounded by pieces of the lottery ticket that had changed her life. Understanding for the first time in 3 years that wealth and happiness were not synonymous, that success measured in dollars could coexist with failure measured in relationships, that sometimes the greatest fortune comes from recognizing what you already have rather than pursuing what you think you want. In the months that followed, Rebecca did exactly what she had promised. She established a foundation that provided counseling for lottery winners and other people dealing with sudden wealth, created scholarship programs for teachers in low-income schools, and donated the vast majority of her lottery winnings to organizations focused on strengthening families and communities. She returned to teaching 5th grade at a school in one of the poorest neighborhoods in her city, where her students knew nothing about her lottery history, and valued her simply for her ability to make learning engaging and her genuine care for their success. She moved into a modest apartment, drove a used car, and rediscovered the satisfaction that comes from living within her means and finding joy in simple pleasures. The relationship with her children remained complicated, but slowly began to heal as they saw her return to the values she had tried to instill in them before money complicated everything. Carlos remarried, but eventually acknowledged that their divorce had been the result of problems money had revealed rather than problems money had created. The interview became a touchstone for people struggling with the relationship between money and happiness, for families dealing with sudden wealth, and for anyone who had ever believed that external circumstances could provide internal peace. It reminded millions of viewers that the things money can buy, possessions, experiences, freedom from financial stress, are not the same as the things that create lasting happiness, purpose, connection, love, and the satisfaction that comes from contributing something meaningful to the world. Rebecca learned that winning the lottery had taught her the most valuable lesson of her life, that happiness is not a destination you can purchase, but a way of traveling through life with gratitude for what you already have, appreciation for the people who love you for who you are rather than what you can provide, and the recognition that meaning comes not from what you can accumulate, but from what you can contribute. The lottery winner's curse, she discovered, was not the money itself. It was the belief that money could provide what only human connection, personal purpose, and authentic relationships can actually deliver. And once she understood that distinction, she was finally free to build a life that was truly rich in all the ways that actually matter.